Welcome to Coffee with the Sarlos. We are your hosts of the show, Karen and Kelly Sarlo. Whether you're struggling with grief or you just need answers, we connect you with spirit to find relief, clarity, and direction in life. We can help you move forward.
Good morning, Kelly.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm content, you?
I'm good. I was just saying to you that I started the day in a beautiful way where I got to wake up and Parker was at the foot of the bed and I got a snuggle this morning.
Oh, nice. He was on his back, just snoring away.
Oh, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's step into our show. This is about a man who calls and we can see each other. We're over Zoom and he says, Karen, I'd like medium and I'd like to know if you would be able to connect with my grandpa. So I checked in and I said, Grandpa, are you here? Do you have anything to say? And I hear very clearly, goot.
Okay.
And I'm like,
I don't know that I would ever assume that something was clear if it wasn't a word.
fair. And this, like, my head was like, what the hell is this? I said, is this a sound? You know, like, ooh, ooh.
Thank you for that. Starting my morning off right.
You know what I mean, though?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I thought, what the heck? And the grandpa says to me again, goot. And I thought, did you mean goat?
I love how you said, I clearly heard, and then you decided to correct the spirit world.
Yes, because when you don't know the word, that's what you're going to do. Because I'm trying to find meaning. I'm trying to find connection, which wasn't any of my business. None of that was my business. The whole scenario was none of my business. So anyway, so he just said, just say goot. And I'm like, okay. So.
But this person's paying me.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what goes through my head.
Like, it's just like you sit there thinking, really? So, you know, it takes a little bit of courage to do this job. Mm-hmm. So I looked at this man straight in the face and I said, goot. Honestly, Kelly, I just find this so funny to just say that to somebody at the very beginning of a session when they say, can you get my grandpa? And the reply is goot. And this man looks at me and he goes, did you just say goot?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And now, which made it worse for me.
Yeah, of course. Like shitting yourself.
Yes. And I said, I did. And I said, would that be correct? Or am I
stroking?
And I'm like, he can see that I'm uncomfortable. And he goes, oh, Karen, he says, goot is good. He says, I get goot. And I'm like, oh. He goes, I'm not going to explain it to you now, or do you want me to explain it to you now, or do I wait till the end? What do I do with this? He goes, I'm not sure what to do with it. And I said, me neither. I said, so why not leave it to the end of the session? Because I would assume that if your grandfather wanted more out of that, he would have said more for me to offer to you. Now, that's me just being me. So I said, I really don't know what to do with this, and I'm being honest. I'm being very human with you. I'm just telling you I don't know what to do with it. So can we leave it and do the session and then see if we can figure it out? And he goes, sure. And he says, I'm writing notes here. He says, so I'm just going to write it at the beginning and I'm going to put a question mark just to remind myself to ask you about it at the end of the session in case you forget. And I said, that would be super helpful because there is a good chance I will forget this by the end of the session. And he goes, okay, good, just go. He says, am I allowed to ask questions? And I said, 100%. You're in complete control of the session. He says, even when you're talking to the dead person? And I said, yes. He goes, I can interrupt that flow of thought? Yes. I can ask my grandpa questions directly, like through you? Yes. I encourage it, as a matter of fact. So he goes, okay. He says, would my grandpa be willing to say anything else? And it doesn't have to be about goot. It can be about anything. He says, can you ask him? So I'm going to call the client Nash. So I said, okay, Nash, I am doing that. That's just what your grandpa said to start the session. And I don't know why it was so all alone, but I'll just continue doing what I'm doing. And he goes, okay, go ahead. So I said, Grandpa, what else do you want to say? And he goes, well, I want to tell him, I'm right. You're wrong. I forgive you.
I'm right. You're wrong. And I forgive you for being wrong.
To his grandson, Nash. This
really
is the
like
message
this.
to Nash.
I really like this.
Yeah. And it's just 3. Oh, I really like Grandpa. He's so direct, eh? So when I hear the 3 sentences like that, I realize Goot is very intentional. And I realize that Grandpa knows exactly what he's doing. And I sink into channeling. I sink into it because I feel his confidence in his messages and his clarity.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because like at that point, because of that confidence in him, I don't know about you, but I feel less detached about the need for me to understand the message at all.
That's right.
Or to even clarify it, because I assume at that point, the client, whose name is Nash in this story, will also just get it and be like, okay, thank you, got it, keep going.
Yes.
And not need, well, do you understand? Do you know what that is? Can you explain it to me? Like where there isn't testing involved. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
It can be. Yes. So I said this to Nash, those 3 sentences. And I can observe as a human in another human being that he's really freaking processing that. And there's silence. So I don't interrupt Nash. And I don't ask Grandpa any more questions. I just simply sit there. And Nash is quiet for a little bit. And then he says to me, Karen, can you ask Grandpa if he wants to add to that? And he says, I'm not testing. He says, I just want to know what he'd like to add to that. And you'll understand in a minute. And if not, I'll explain all of it to you. He says, this is fascinating to me. He says, could you talk to Grandpa more about that, please? And if he wants to go into other things, I understand. But holy jumpin', I really want to know about this. And I said, okay. So I said, Grandpa, I said, door's open. And he goes, Grandpa says to me, about time. So I replied like that to Nash. And Nash looks at me and he has such an emotional response to this. His emotional response is really mixed. It's excited, it's anticipatory, it's bubbly, like it's really cool, Kelly. So I said, okay, Grandpa, like I'm sitting on the precipice here. What the hell is going on? What are you guys talking about? And he goes, Karen, he says, what I'm saying I'm right about were the ETs, were the spaceships, were all the stories I told him and my grandsons and my kids about all the experiences I personally had with aliens. And he says, so what he's calling up about and asking today is he wants to know now that I'm dead, now that I'm on the other side, what's the truth? And so he's asking, but he didn't want to come out and ask you directly. He wanted to see if this is something that I would spit out and say at some point in his booking, in his time with me. And he says, so I'm cutting to the chase because that's the kind of man I am. I am very direct. He said, I learned as I aged in life not to waste time because time is so important. And I have an hour to talk to my grandson. So I wanted to get right to the point that aliens are real and that we are not alone in this universe. We are not alone on this planet. And aliens don't just exist in other dimensions. They're here on Earth and they're here all the time. And there are a lot of them and a lot of people know about them. And that this is a worldwide situation. Nobody can contain it. And he says, I'm just going to speak to you. He says, and then you can tell all my grandson this stuff. So I told him that I needed to listen. I told Nash that his grandpa was talking about extraterrestrials. And alien spaceships, like all of these things, and that I needed a minute. And so his grandpa really went into detail and said, look, he said, right from the time that the kids were small, my grandkids, I was talking to my own children. And I'll say my own children, meaning my daughters-in-law, my sons-in-law, like this is my family. He said right when the kids were young that he spoke to his children, meaning his own kids, his own sons-in-law, daughters-in-law, grandchildren. He spoke openly about all of his experiences, and he decided this is the truth, so I'm not hiding it, and I'm not going to feel shame about talking about it. I'm just simply going to be myself and be open, and I'm just going to tell the truth. And no matter how they respond to it, I'm going to be good with it because I'm truth-telling. And he said, so I did this. And he said, when Nash was a young lad, he loved the stories. He loved listening to this. And I always told the stories of the aliens truthfully, which meant that they were here to help us. They were here to teach us. They were here to help us solve problems about our economy. Like they were here to teach us about our economy and how to fix it, about our currency. They were here to teach us about energy, about gas, petroleum, coal, all of these things that we didn't need to use. They were here to teach us about how to be better consumers of the resources on our planet and how we could be more respectful of the planet and of each other in our own species towards each other as human beings, so that there were not wars, but that there was peace, and that they were here purposefully on our side, and that they are not here to scare us, to dominate us, to hurt us, to create any type of anger or fighting, fear, anything in that regard. They were here peacefully, and they were not here to look frightening or to attack in any way. They are peaceful beings. And so he would tell all of these stories of these experiences that he had with his family. And he thought, as long as I'm here saying these things and I'm being truthful about my own personal experience, then hopefully they trust their grandpa, they trust their dad, they trust their father-in-law, they trust their spouse. And because of who I am and because of my consistency in being an honest person, a person who values integrity, and that I live my way, or I live my life this way with consistency. He goes, so because of these experiences with these aliens, I realized how important it was to be consistent and how important it was to live in honesty and integrity. And that if I lived my life that way, that when the public, and I don't know who it is in the public, but we find out eventually with Nash, when the public comes along and draws scary beings and tries to say woo-woo stuff or scary stuff, you should be scared, then Nash would be able to say, I don't know why you're trying to scare me. My grandpa talks to these people and interacts with them, and they're not scary, so I don't know who you're talking to. But to be able to dismantle that belief system that was trying to be enforced on other people through other people by telling scary stories, by watching TV shows that try and depict them as scary beings, or whatever, music industry. I don't know all of it because I don't like being part of that. But this grandpa was just authentically having his own experience and then trying to be the person who could tell those stories where people could listen to it because of consistent truth. He said, so that's what I did. And he said, and for a while it worked. And then he said, Nash and his brothers. And I said, okay, wait a minute. Nash and his brothers? So Nash has a bunch of brothers? And he goes, yes. And I said, okay. I said, like more than 3? And he goes, yes, more than 3. And I said, okay, thank you, because now I'm getting some facts. And I said, does Nash have any sisters? No, none. Were there any miscarriages? No. Did his mom have any abortions? No, none. And those are just facts now that I can present to Nash, and hopefully he knows some of those answers. Maybe some, maybe not all. Maybe he does know all. Who knows? We'll find out. But we're going to give messages with facts. That's what I want, both. So I said, okay. I said, so what happened to Grandpa? He goes, well, tell him all of that first. So I did. And Nash said to me, this is very, very accurate about my grandpa, what I know about my grandpa in my lifetime, about his honesty, about his integrity. He says, I could say more things. I thought my grandpa was stubborn, he said, in some ways, but I'm understanding now that it wasn't stubbornness. It was his determination to say the truth. I thought that was very cool, that Nash is figuring this out, that he's sorting through these things. He goes, can you continue to talk to him? And I said, yeah. So I said, Grandpa, what else do you want to say? And he goes, well, he says, like, there was a long period of time where the grandboys believed my stories, and they really enjoyed coming over, and I talked about it openly, and it was good. And then he said, I noticed that Nash in particular is my oldest grandson and in this family. And he says, he stopped. He said, and when I approached him and said, hey, what's with the attitude? Because his attitude shifted. The way he didn't want to listen to it anymore. The way he would just get up and walk away, or he'd just start playing on a cell device or a gaming device. He'd tune me out. And he would say, hey, what are you doing? That's rude. And he said, eventually I realized that Nash was telling his friends some of my stories. And he was telling other people my stories about these beings from different dimensions. And he was being made fun of. And as a result of being made fun of, he decided that he wasn't going to share these stories with his people anymore, his friends and whoever was making fun of him. But he started shutting his grandpa down. And so his grandpa realized, oh, he's listening to other people's opinions. But other people haven't earned that place by telling things with honesty and integrity. So Grandpa was trying to step back in and say, well, hold up now. Why are you believing these people over me? And he was trying to point out to his grandsons, you trust a person when they've earned it by being honest with consistency. And he was trying to teach him these types of lessons. And of course, Nash just didn't want to have anything to do with that. He wanted to believe his friends. He wanted to be part of watching the scary movies. But then the scary movies actually did scare him. Like, they worked. They weren't just a movie anymore. They actually believed the movies. So there was this rift that occurred between Nash and his grandpa, and it occurred as well with his other brothers. So I said, well, Grandpa, like, what did you do then? He goes, well, tell him that. And he says, and then I'll tell you what I did. So I said, well, Nash, I have the next part of the story. So I told him, and he went, yeah. He says, that's exactly what happened. He says, I became huge into the sci-fi movies, and I got huge into gaming and all of this stuff, and really went down this rabbit hole of believing that they were things to kill, and in video games, shoot and kill them, and that they were chasing you, the video games, like where the aliens are chasing you because they want to dominate the world. And he says, no, you're right. He says, that's all very true. He says, and it's all done very gradually. I didn't really notice any of this shift. He said, but you're right. He says, Grandpa's right. And he goes, Karen, he goes, I've been together with my brothers, my family, so much since he's passed. And we've all been talking about this. And he goes, we've all been talking about the fact that we went right down that rabbit hole and that we really disrespected Grandpa. And he goes, we're really struggling, all of us, with the fact that this man worked so hard to love us, so hard to be a man of integrity. And we literally abused him. We literally walked away, shunned him, like we wouldn't listen to him, like we were not it was not right. And he says, he says, I'm going to speak like on behalf of my brothers, but this is my session. He says, but it's confusing, Karen, and you don't understand it all. He says, so I'll just explain briefly that in this conversation with my family, I'm the one that volunteered to book an appointment with you to find out about this. And I actually am writing notes to go back to talk to all of my brothers and my family about it because we wanted to know if Grandpa was right. Like, we are now researching it and we are discovering that there are really legitimate people on earth all over the world that are connecting with these beings that are benevolent and loving and kind, and that Grandpa was right. And he says, but we needed to hear it from Grandpa. And we're coming back to Grandpa because we're trying to honor the fact that he was trying to be honest about it the entire time. And so I'm here today because I really wanted to apologize. And honestly, Kelly, he just sat and he had to cry. Mm-hmm. He says, like, I'm here to apologize. He says, like, I'm a freaking grown man. I've got my own kids now. And he says, and I'm trying to do right by Grandpa. And he says, but we've been talking more and more about the aliens and the fact, he says, that we want to connect with them. Grandpa did.
I don't think this is really a show about aliens, right? And it's not even a show about telling the truth or integrity. It's a show about individuation.
Yes.
Because what happened was not Nash's fault. And it's beautiful that he's a grown man and he's taking personal responsibility to understand how his actions unintentionally hurt another human being. I love that. Nash was a kid who loved his grandfather and was receiving information, as we all do, from the parental figures in our life. And when the dynamics in our life shift around that age, preteens, right, your friends become more important as influences than your parents or your grandparents now. And that's just a natural form of development or stage of development. And so the belief systems and the information that he was receiving was contradicted by these influences in his life. And we all have a deep need for belonging. It's a fundamental need of ours. And so as the influence shifts, our need to belong to this peer group goes through the roof, right? And so we all are faced with this choice to decide, okay, do I stay in alignment with what I see and hear and know and believe at home? Or do I shift and align myself with this other group? Mm-hmm. And he aligned himself with another group, as most of us do with our peers at that age, or at some point when we are individuating and trying to figure out who we are outside of our family, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the insidiousness of cultural influence happens where you don't really notice that an innocent or what appears to be an innocent game that's just supposed to be fun and visually stimulating actually has these undertones of we want you to adopt this belief system. And then, like you say, I want to be part of a movie night. I want to be part of date night. I want to be part of ghost hunting and all these adventures that bond these peer groups together, right?
Yeah.
Not understanding, most of us not understanding how a belief system is actually being planted and watered.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, yeah, Grandpa is wounded over here in the kind of periphery now of Nash's life. But that's not a kid's fault.
Yep.
It is our personal responsibility, as Nash is doing at this point in his life when he knows better, to begin doing better. Mm-hmm. And I love that he's come back to do that. Mm-hmm. And it is extremely unfortunate and sad that his grandfather has passed. But I also see or hear from this story that his grandfather understands this process, and that's why he can so swiftly deliver, I was right, you were wrong, I forgive you.
Yeah. And how cleanly he does it, eh?
Yeah, because he's not forgiving the adult grandson.
Right.
He's forgiving the kid.
Yeah.
Just for being a kid.
Thank you for wrapping that up, Kelly. That was beautifully said. So then I went back to Grandpa and I said, do you have anything else to say to Nash? And he goes, yeah, I love him. I love all of them. I love all of them. I love all of the boys. He said, and I love all of their families and their kids. He says, my great grandkids. He says, these are good people. He says they are good people that were taught things that were just not right. And he says, but I still love them. And he says, and I want them to know something very important about going forward with this. He says, because I see what they're doing on earth. And I said, what do you mean? What are they doing on earth? And he goes, well, he says, they're researching it. They're learning about it. And he says, and they're learning how to make contact. And he says, several of them are learning to do this. And he goes, what I want them to understand the most is that this is all done through love. And he said, what I want them to understand the most is that this isn't something to fear. And he said, and that it's within you. You're not looking for an alien to appear on the outside and to take a form and to stand in front of you and talk to you. You're going to do it internally. It's a connection inside of you. Don't walk around trying to find a physical spaceship. Sit and go within yourself to make your connection. And he says, tell them to do it that way so that they're not actually trying to bring and manifest a spaceship right in their yard. He said that is something that is incredibly important, is to access it within. And how important it is because it's what you feel. It's what you're going to feel inside. It's the inner knowings. And from that space of finding that connection to these beings through love, through this peacefulness, then they can manifest themselves and the human will not believe the crap they've been told.
Well, people aren't going to like that because on average, everyone values sight as a gift more than anything. And actually, I mean, I mean this with the most amount of kindness, okay? This show is entirely boring to me because this is what we do. You could just replace aliens for medium, right? Like this was just nothing new is all I mean, right? I usually get to sit down and I hear something like fascinating and new about like someone's actual life. And it's like, oh, okay, we're just going to talk about the fact that this thing has been denied, whatever. People overvalue sight as a gift. And you're talking about the fact that if people are seeking out aliens and other life, that they want to physically see the spaceship, physically see the aliens. And those basically translate to some of our worst clients because they want to know, did you physically see my grandfather? Did you physically see, my old house that I used to live in? And when they want to develop their own gifts and they say they value everything that we're talking about on this show, they want only to develop their sight. Right? Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is you start to realize it's exactly what you just talked about. It's supposed to be developed internally. It's supposed to be the connection, the telepathy, if you want to word it that way, the feeling that you get so that you have inner knowings about the messages and the existence.
Yes.
And it's when people transition to that understanding or capital K knowing when they start to truly open up their gifts and truly enjoy this experience and become the best clients, right? So for those who are ready, this will be a lot of fun. And for those who are not, this will not be any fun.
Okay, I want to continue because, thank you, Kelly, because Grandpa explains to Nash, one of the reasons that you do this is because there are certain groups on this planet who have replicated and can replicate what a spaceship looks like, what a UFO or what an alien looks like. And they are going to manifest physically and call themselves the real things and then attack human beings in order to create fear.
Right. Isn't that just called the USA?
Okay. So let's say certain people in the USA, but I understand what you're saying. I know you don't mean the entire country. You don't mean the whole country, but what his grandpa is telling him is that if you rely on sight, then you can easily be fooled.
Yeah.
And if you only rely on sight, you will be forever fooled.
Yeah.
Right to your death.
There's, for sure. Everything in the media is a deep fake at this point, right?
Yeah.
There's shows out there called Correction, which is incredible to prove this point, to show how even like security footage and everything is such a deep fake that if we're just relying on that, we don't actually have information or connection to our inner knowings, intuition, etc.
Yeah. So Grandpa's coming through to say this is something that he learned. That he learned you don't just look. You don't just judge by what you see. You actually have to be able to feel it deep inside of you. And if you aren't connected to that, then when it looks scary, when it looks violent, when it looks certain ways, then you're really going to believe that. So he's really showing up to be able to help Nash and his family connect in the healthiest way possible.
Okay, so if we've lost anyone, well, I guess we've already lost them, but let's just chat in case someone hung around to like, what other message can I get from this? Like, we can draw this parallel right into interpersonal relationships.
That's
if
right.
all you are relying on is the fact that the relationship looks good, they've got the house, they've got the cars, they've got the 2.5 children, they've got the hot tub, they've got the trips, they've got, the perfectly well done hair or whatever. Like, if you are not attuned to how you feel when you're around this couple, then you might just think, oh, they're perfect. They have it all figured out. They've got all their ducks in a row. And then we start the comparison mode of how come I don't? How come I can't? When will I get there? I just need to work harder. And we berate ourselves thinking that that's going to be the reason or the way that we find ourselves to that perfection of what looks right or looks good. I'll just keep encouraging people to sink into what does this feel like, because that's going to be a much more accurate guide as to whether or not things are actually working.
Grandpa talks to Nash about a relationship. He talks about the fact that these aren't beings just to defend yourself against. And that when you create a relationship with somebody, it takes time, it takes connection, it takes communication. And if you're terrified of something, you're not leaning into communicating.
We're not even talking about aliens anymore. We're talking about people. Like, this is just
Exactly.
relationships, connection.
That's right.
Nature, even. The way you connect to nature when it's terrifying, or an animal, right? Like, anyway, sorry. Go on. I'm excited.
No, it's so good, Kelly, because it was such a beautiful conversation. I felt so fortunate to be able to talk to Nash's grandpa about everything that, like all these things that he had talked about, to be able to say that to Nash, to know that Nash is taking that back to the rest of his family, in particular, his other brothers that treated Grandpa in a similar way, in their own time, of course. And then you get to hear that there's this whole family that's healing this relationship with Grandpa. And while they feel bad about it, Grandpa's coming in and saying, I love you.
Well, I also think, we can't end the podcast without also acknowledging your role in that. And I'll say a medium's role in that because, I think finding a medium is very much like finding any other teacher or mentor out there. You have to make, ironically, a great connection with them, right? And Nash, sure, could develop that over probably a long period of time to get to that place of feeling like there was forgiveness and healing between him and his grandfather. But he got it in what, a half an hour or an hour?
It was a half hour.
Half an hour. Look at that. Like, I think that is also really remarkable because you have developed those gifts of connection. You can gift the connection in such a beautifully streamlined, succinct little package in a session so that he can begin whatever journey he wants to begin now.
Right.
Or continue whatever journey he has begun himself.
Perfect. Yeah. So this brought our session to an end, actually. And Nash and I just had a quick little chat at the very end, and he asked my own opinion of connections with what we call aliens on Earth. And he said, do mediums connect with aliens, or is that like a whole other thing, Karen? And I said, well, I can't speak on behalf of other mediums. I have no idea. And you would probably have to ask each one personally what their answer is to that, right? But we had a little conversation around, well, are they in the same place as dead people? Like, is the universe just one great big place versus when we die, do we go to one other location, And I'll say religions have names for certain locations, if you believe in certain religions. Or are you part of this big universe where you become more one with these beings and there aren't as many barriers or fears between them? Which I thought was super cool. Mm-hmm. It's a great conversation.
Lovely. Well, thank you for sharing today. Thanks for listening to Coffee with the Sarlos. If you enjoyed the show today, help spread the love with a like, share, or review of the podcast. See you next Saturday with a brand new episode.